Something inside you feels different. You cannot point to the moment it started. There was no accident, no diagnosis, no single sentence spoken by another person that broke you open. And yet here you are, standing in the middle of a life that looks, from the outside, completely intact, and feeling from the inside like a stranger walking through someone else's rooms. Your job is still there. Your family still calls you by the same name. Your mirror still shows the same face, tired perhaps, but recognizable. And still, something underneath all of it has shifted, the way a foundation shifts long before a house begins to crack. I want you to notice right now, as you listen to these words, that you already know what I'm talking about. You don't need convincing. You need permission. Permission to stop pretending the discomfort is a malfunction. Permission to consider, just for the next 30 minutes, that this unraveling you've been quietly enduring is not the end of you. It is the beginning of you. Carl Jung spent a lifetime studying what he called individuation, the long, often brutal process by which a human being stops living as a fragment of other people's expectations and starts becoming whole. He noticed something almost every therapist, every mystic, every person who has ever sat alone at 3 a.m. with their thoughts eventually notices too. Transformation rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives as absence, as silence where excitement used to live, as a small, persistent ache that says quietly, this isn't it anymore. So let me ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it, not just read past it. When was the last time something you used to want, a goal, a person, a version of your future, stopped feeling like yours? Sit with that for one moment. Because that flicker of recognition you just felt, that's not confusion, that's data. That is your unconscious mind, patient and ancient and far wiser than your daily thoughts, sending you a signal it has likely been sending for months, maybe years, in a language you were never taught to read. Tonight, we are going to learn that language together. We are going to walk through 10 signs, 10 psychological signals, that indicate your inner world is not falling apart but reorganizing itself into something new. And I want you to listen not with your analytical mind, the part of you that wants to categorize and dismiss, but with the quieter part underneath it. The part that already knows this is about you. Let's begin. The first sign is this: your unconscious is changing your direction before your conscious mind understands why. Picture, for a moment, a river that has run the same course for years. Then, deep beneath the surface, in places no one can see, the earth begins to shift, a few degrees, almost imperceptible. From above, the water still looks the same. It still flows. But slowly, so slowly that no single day reveals it, the river begins carving a new path. By the time anyone standing on the bank notices the change, the river has already decided where it's going. This is what is happening inside you. You have not consciously chosen to lose interest in the things that once consumed you. You didn't sit down one afternoon and decide that the career you built, the relationship you invested in, the identity you performed so well for so long, would suddenly start to feel like a costume 2 sizes too small. Nobody decides that on purpose. It happens beneath the threshold of decision, in the same deep water where your dreams are made, where your instincts live, where the parts of you that never learned to speak in words still communicate through feeling. Jung believed the unconscious does not simply react to your life. It participates in it. It has its own intentions, its own sense of timing, its own quiet campaign to move you toward wholeness, even when, especially when, your conscious mind is still clinging to the old shore. This is why you can be objectively successful and still feel hollow. This is why you can be surrounded by people who love you and still feel a loneliness that has nothing to do with them. Your unconscious does not care about appearances. It does not care about the story you've told your friends, your parents, yourself. It cares about truth. And when the life you're living no longer matches the person you are becoming, it will make its complaint known. Not through words, but through a slow, deliberate withdrawal of energy from everything that no longer fits. That's what disinterest actually is, not laziness, not depression necessarily. A withdrawal of libido, in the Jungian sense, a redirection of your psychic energy away from what has expired and towards something not yet visible. So ask yourself, gently, without judgment, what have you stopped caring about that you used to care about deeply? And what does that absence make room for? Because here is the truth most people are too afraid to sit with. What if the life you're losing interest in is simply the life you have already outgrown? Let that question breathe for a moment. Don't rush past it. Your mind wants to solve it immediately, wants to jump to fixing, to planning, to figuring out the next 5 years in a single sitting. Let it wait. Some questions are not meant to be answered quickly. They are meant to be lived with, turned over slowly, like a stone in your palm, until their true shape reveals itself. Now, the second sign. This one is harder to hear, because it requires you to look at the part of yourself you have spent your entire life trying not to look at. The parts of yourself you rejected are coming back. Every human being, in the process of becoming socially acceptable, learns to disown certain pieces of who they are. As children, we quickly discover which parts of us earn love and approval, and which parts earn punishment, rejection, or shame. And so, without ever consciously deciding to, we begin performing surgery on our own personalities. We cut away our anger because it made others uncomfortable. We cut away our ambition because it seemed arrogant. We cut away our sensitivity because it made us a target. We cut away our creativity because it wasn't practical, our confidence because it wasn't humble enough, our desire because it wasn't appropriate. Jung called everything we cut away the shadow. And here is the part that most people misunderstand completely. The shadow is not evil. The shadow is simply unlived life. It is every part of you that was too much, too loud, too strange, too intense for the environment you grew up in. Banished not because it was wrong, but because it was inconvenient for someone else's comfort. The problem is nothing in the psyche truly disappears, it only goes underground. And what goes underground does not stay silent forever. It waits, it gathers pressure. And eventually, often during exactly the kind of restless, unsettled period you may be living through right now, it begins knocking on the door of your conscious awareness, demanding to be let back in. This is why you might be noticing flashes of anger you don't understand. Why a long-buried creative urge has suddenly resurfaced, insistent, almost uncomfortable in its intensity. Why you feel a hunger for recognition you were taught to be ashamed of. Why your sensitivity, the very thing you spent years armoring against, suddenly feels like it wants to breathe again. You are not falling apart. You are being reunited with yourself. And I want to be very clear about something, because this is where so many people go wrong when they first encounter their shadow. You do not become stronger by destroying your darker parts. You do not heal by shaming your anger into silence again, by talking yourself out of your ambition, by convincing your sensitivity to disappear a second time. You become whole, not by amputation but by integration. By finally sitting down with the parts of yourself you exiled and asking them, honestly, for the first time, what were you trying to protect me from? The part of yourself you've spent years hiding may contain the strength you've been searching for. Let that settle into you for a moment. The anger you suppressed may be the same energy that could finally set a boundary you've needed for years. The ambition you buried may be the exact fuel required for the new life your unconscious is already building. The sensitivity you armored against may be the very instrument through which you finally create something true. Nothing about you was ever a mistake. It was simply mistimed. And perhaps now finally the timing is right. Which brings us to the third sign, one that will feel at first almost eerie. But I promise you, there is nothing supernatural required to understand it. Strange patterns have started getting your attention. Maybe you've noticed a certain number appearing again and again, in places that shouldn't logically connect. Maybe a stranger says something in passing that answers a question you never spoke aloud. Maybe the same emotional scenario, the same kind of betrayal, the same flavor of disappointment, the same shape of longing, keeps finding you in different relationships, different jobs, different cities, as though life were somehow rehearsing the same scene with different actors. You start to wonder if the universe is speaking to you. I want to ground this because it's important, and because I respect your intelligence too much to hand you empty mysticism. The value here is not in believing that every coincidence carries some cosmic instruction. The value is in noticing what these patterns reveal about the state of your attention, and more importantly, about the state of your inner world. When you are in the middle of psychological transformation, your perceptual filters change. Jung would say the unconscious becomes more active, more porous, more willing to surface material that your conscious mind would normally screen out. You are not suddenly living in a more meaningful universe than before. You are simply, for the first time in a long time, paying attention. Sometimes the most important message isn't what keeps happening around you, it's why you can't stop noticing it. That repeated number, that recurring dream, that eerie sense of déjà vu, they are less like messages from beyond and more like mirrors. They reflect back to you exactly what your psyche is currently preoccupied with. If you keep encountering the theme of abandonment, it is because some part of you is still processing abandonment. If you keep noticing symbols of new beginnings, doors, thresholds, dawn, the number that has always meant change to you, it is because some part of you is already standing at that threshold, waiting for the rest of you to catch up. Your attention is a spotlight, and right now that spotlight has begun turning toward exactly what your transformation requires you to see. Which leads us into something deeper, something that sits beneath all three of these signs like the root beneath the branches. Your old identity, the version of you built from approval, from achievement, from the roles you were assigned before you were old enough to choose them, has begun to feel too small. We will go there next. But before we do, I want you to pause, right where you are, and simply notice how your body feels after hearing these first three signs. Notice whether something in your chest has loosened, even slightly. Notice whether a truth you've been avoiding has just quietly raised its hand. Because what comes next will ask you to look directly at the identity you built your entire life around, and to consider, honestly, whether it was ever truly yours to begin with. Let's go there now. Your old identity starts feeling too small. Think for a moment about the identity you have been wearing. Not the deep self, not the soul beneath the soul, but the identity, the role, the mask, the carefully constructed persona you learned to perform so well, that even you began to believe it was the whole truth of who you are. Maybe it was built around being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never falls apart. Maybe it was built around achievement, the promotions, the metrics, the external proof that you were worth something. Maybe it was built around being needed, being agreeable, being whatever the people around you required in order to keep loving you. For a long time, that identity served you. It got you through childhood. It got you approval when approval felt like survival. It got you a seat at tables you were terrified you'd be thrown out of. And so you wore it and wore it and wore it until you forgot it was ever a costume at all. But costumes are made for a particular season, and you are not the same person who first put this one on. This is why the achievements that once thrilled you now feel curiously flat. This is why praise that used to fill you up now slides off you like water off stone. This is why you can accomplish the very thing you spent a decade chasing and feel, in the quiet moment right after, not triumph but a strange hollow silence. It is not that success stopped mattering. It is that the self who wanted it has already begun to dissolve, and the achievement is being handed to someone who, psychologically, no longer fully exists. Jung would say you are experiencing the death of a persona, and death, even psychological death, is never comfortable. It is disorienting. It can feel like losing your mind when in truth you are simply losing a mask you mistook for your face. I want to offer you something important here, something to hold on to as the ground continues to shift beneath you. You are not necessarily lost. You may simply be between identities. There is a space in every genuine transformation where the old self has ended but the new self has not yet fully arrived. A kind of psychological threshold, neither here nor there, uncomfortable precisely because it has no name yet. Feeling lost can sometimes mean the person you used to be is no longer available to you. Let that phrase move through you slowly. Not available to you, not destroyed, not erased. Simply, no longer available. The way a childhood home might still exist on a map, but you can never truly live there again, not as the person you've become. You are not broken for being unable to return to who you were. You were never meant to stay there. This dissolving of identity does not happen in isolation. It brings with it something Jung considered central to the entire process of becoming whole, the collision of your inner opposites. Your inner conflicts have become impossible to ignore. You feel it, don't you? The pull between security and freedom, the safe path that guarantees stability, and the wild, uncertain path that might actually be alive. The pull between approval and authenticity, the version of you that keeps everyone comfortable and the version of you that finally tells the truth, even when the truth costs you something. The pull between comfort and growth, the familiar room you know every inch of, and the unknown corridor that terrifies you precisely because it might lead somewhere real. Most people try to resolve these tensions by choosing a side and forcing the other into silence. They pick security and quietly starve their freedom. They pick approval and quietly murder their authenticity, one small betrayal of self at a time. But Jung offered a different path, one that doesn't require you to kill half of yourself to satisfy the other half. He called it the transcendent function, the capacity of the psyche, when both sides of a conflict are held honestly, without either being suppressed, to generate a third way forward that neither side could have reached alone. This means your task right now is not to decide urgently whether you should choose safety or freedom, comfort or growth, the approval of others or the truth of yourself. Your task is to stop pretending the conflict isn't there, to let both voices speak, fully, without shaming either one into silence. Your longing for security is not weakness. It is trying to protect something precious. Your longing for freedom is not selfishness. It is trying to keep you alive in the deepest sense of the word. The war inside you may not be destroying you. It may be trying to create a more complete version of you. And this brings us to something you have likely noticed, perhaps with a kind of exhausted recognition. The sense that your life keeps handing you the same lesson, again and again, dressed in different clothing. Your life starts repeating the same deeper lessons, different people, different circumstances, the same wound, reopened in a slightly different shape each time. Perhaps it is always the moment you shrink yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Perhaps it is always the friend or partner who mirrors the same emotional unavailability your parent once offered you. Perhaps it is always the job that starts with excitement and ends with the same quiet erasure of your own voice. It can feel from the inside like some cruel repetition, like life itself has a grudge against you. But Jung and modern psychology after him would suggest something gentler and frankly more empowering. These patterns are not punishments, they are curriculum. Your psyche will keep presenting you with the same lesson, in new packaging, until the lesson is finally learned. Not because it is cruel, but because it is patient, and it trusts that eventually, you will be ready to respond differently than you did before. If the same lesson keeps appearing in different forms, perhaps life isn't repeating itself. Perhaps you're being given another chance to respond differently. This is not fate in the mystical sense. It is psychology in the truest sense. The unconscious repeats what remains unresolved, not out of malice, but out of an almost parental insistence that you finally face what you've been avoiding, because on the other side of facing it is a freedom you cannot yet imagine. And to face it, something in you has to change first, not your circumstances, your relationship to not knowing. You become more comfortable with not knowing. There was a time when uncertainty felt unbearable to you, when you needed the plan, the guarantee, the 5-year outline before you were willing to take a single step. And now, something curious is happening. You are beginning to move forward without knowing exactly where you're going. Not because you've given up on direction, but because you've begun to trust something deeper than your plans, an inner compass that doesn't require a map to still be reliable. This is one of the most significant psychological shifts a human being can undergo, because it means you no longer need total control before you're willing to live. You are learning what mystics and depth psychologists have both, in their own languages, tried to describe for centuries. That certainty was never actually the thing keeping you safe. It was simply the thing keeping you comfortable. And comfort and safety, it turns out, were never quite the same thing. The moment you stop needing to know exactly where you're going, you may finally become free enough to discover where you actually belong. But this newfound tolerance for uncertainty does something else too, something that can feel, at first, almost like betrayal. It makes your old comfort start to feel like a cage. Comfort begins feeling like a prison. The routines that once soothed you now feel like walls closing in. The relationships that once felt safe now feel like small rooms you've outgrown, but haven't yet found the courage to leave. Nothing about your circumstances has technically changed. The job is the same job, the home is the same home, the people are the same people. And yet you find yourself standing in the middle of your own familiar life, feeling an ache you can't quite name. The ache of a self that has become too large for the container it's been living in. This is not ingratitude. This is not a character flaw. This is the natural consequence of growth colliding with stagnancy. A snake does not shed its skin because the skin betrayed it. It sheds it because the skin no longer fits the body growing beneath it. There comes a moment when the life that once protected you begins preventing you from growing. And if you are honest with yourself right now, in this moment, you may already know which parts of your life have quietly become that, not because they are bad, but because they were sized for a version of you that no longer exists. Which brings us to a sign that most people spend their entire lives running from, when in truth it may be the most important compass they possess. Your fears point directly toward your growth. Look closely at what you avoid, the conversation you keep postponing, the decision you keep circling without ever landing on, the dream you mention only in passing quickly, almost apologetically, before changing the subject. Notice the perfectionism that keeps you endlessly preparing but never starting. Notice the people-pleasing that keeps you agreeing to things your body has already silently refused. Notice the overthinking that spins and spins, never quite arriving, because arriving would mean having to actually act. Jung believed that fear is rarely random. It clusters, with startling precision, around exactly the thresholds we most need to cross. What terrifies you is rarely arbitrary. It is usually a shadow cast by something significant standing just out of view, something your psyche knows is coming, even if your conscious mind is still pretending not to notice. This means fear, instead of being an order to retreat, can become information, a kind of psychological compass, not something to obey blindly, but something to interrogate honestly. What, exactly, am I afraid will happen, and what would it mean about me if it did? Look closely at what you keep avoiding. Your greatest fear may be standing directly in front of your next level of growth. This is not a call to recklessness. It is a call to honesty. The fear itself is not the enemy. The unexamined obedience to it is. And now, we arrive at the deepest sign of all. The one that gathers every thread we've walked through tonight into a single unified truth. Your psyche is preparing you for renewal. Old desires fade, not because you've become incapable of wanting, but because the things you used to want belong to a self that is quietly completing its work. New questions begin to surface, questions you never used to ask yourself, questions about meaning, about purpose, about what a truthful life would actually look like if you stopped performing it for an audience. Relationships shift. Some deepen in ways that surprise you, others fall away with a quiet, almost gentle finality, as though they had simply finished the work they came to do. Priorities rearrange themselves without your conscious permission. And somewhere beneath all of it, slowly, patiently, without fanfare, a new identity begins to take shape, not yet fully formed, not yet visible even to you, but unmistakably present. The way you can feel a season changing before a single leaf has fallen. Before a new life becomes visible, your old life often becomes emotionally impossible to continue. This is why the emptiness you've been feeling is not evidence that something has gone wrong. It is evidence that something ancient and intelligent within you has already begun clearing space for what comes next. The forest does not apologize for the fire that clears the deadwood. It simply grows afterward more alive than before. So, if you have been sitting with the quiet suspicion that you are losing yourself, I want to offer you a different way of understanding what is actually happening. You are not necessarily losing yourself. You may be losing everything that was never truly you, every borrowed belief, every performance staged for approval, every identity assembled to survive a life that no longer requires that particular kind of survival. All of it falling away, not because you are disappearing, but because what was never authentically yours was always going to have to go, eventually, if the real you was ever going to have room to arrive. The restlessness, the disinterest, the strange coincidences, the buried anger and creativity finally speaking again, the inner conflicts you can no longer silence, the fears that keep circling the same closed door. None of it was a malfunction. All of it was preparation. You have not been falling apart. You have been getting ready. And the next chapter isn't waiting for a different person to arrive and finally deserve it. It never was. It's waiting for the real you, the one underneath the performance, underneath the approval seeking, underneath the borrowed identity, to finally, quietly, courageously step forward.